Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a nice 11 game NBA slate. This is a rough slate. I'm playing light today. There's a ton of injuries. We don't really know. The obvious thing to do today will be stacking Atlanta and Indiana, but we're going to have to wait and see on some of the questionable tags for Indiana to see who's going to be starting, so do keep that in mind. But with that said, let's get into this injury report. For the Celtics, Horford is questionable. For the Hawks, Hunter is out. For the Pacers, Nimhard and Brown are questionable. For the Wizards, Shamet is questionable. For the Cavs, Mobley is out and Garland is out. For the Nets, Simmons is out. For the Knicks, Mitchell is out. For the 76ers, Melton is out and Covington is questionable. For the Pelicans, Murphy is questionable. For the Hornets, Ball, Williams, and Hayward are out. For the Bulls, Craig is out and Levine and Vucevic are questionable. For the Rockets, Eason is questionable and Brooks is out. For the Trailblazers, Ayton, Williams are both out. Walker is doubtful. For the Mavs, Lively is questionable. Williams is questionable, and Exum is doubtful. For the Magic, Carter Jr. is questionable. Franz Wagner is out. Fultz is out. Isaac is out. Ingles is out, and Harris is out. And for the Heat, Butler is out. Martin is doubtful, and the Suns, Durant and Gordon are both questionable. So we have a lot of questionable tags. A lot of guys out. Those some of these guys being out really isn't going to make a big effect in fantasy. We have some very high scoring games. The Indiana game has a 266 point total with a 3-point spread in Indiana's favor. That's going to be a popular game to stack, with the total being over 20 points more than any other game on this slate. So you keep that in mind. We also have some very low scoring games in Minnesota and Houston, and also Charlotte, Chicago, as well as Orlando and Denver. So those games are going to be a little bit more avoidable. So if we're going to look at our top plays, though, guards are going to be pretty crazy today. The value is somewhat limited on the slate as well, at least at this point. Hopefully some will open up as we get closer to the slate and get better understanding of lineups and things for today. But we do have a lot of guards that we do like. We're going to start with Halliburton for Indiana. Now his team is favored to win this game. He's had some absolutely monster games lately. I expect him to have another huge monster game here, especially in this very fast-paced game. I do expect this game to get on the over, even though it seems like such a high total. They've been absolutely playing at the speed of lightning lately, and he's getting lots of fantasy output. So I really like his potential in this one. Donovan Mitchell is an interesting play today because the Cavs are playing the Wizards, which will give them an advantage. In the last game that they played against the Wizards, he scored 40 fantasy points. I think that was a little bit of an odd thing because they blew out the Wizards so quick. But I expect him to have a big game in this one. Again, though he definitely carries some risk. He's not a must play by any stretch of imagination. One thing I will try to do is to do a lineup with both Trae Young and Tyrese Halliburton. And Trae Young, his price has popped up a little bit as a result of the situation, but the way that this game should go, he should be a pretty much lock for 45 plus fantasy points. If he can get over 60, that would definitely help us a lot. He and Tyrese are both playing extremely well lately. One of the things that's going to really muck up this slate is Shea Alexander, as he has been playing about as good as anybody in the NBA. He, in fact, he won Western Conference Player of the Week, or Player of the Month, excuse me. And he's been absolutely dominating, and it doesn't seem like the matchups even matter. Now, this is a pretty good matchup for him as well, so I expect him to have a high-scoring game in this one as well. So you could feel pretty comfortable at guard, or at point guard at least, with Shea Alexander, Trae Young, or Tyrese Halliburton because they're all in the same price ranges. Uh, Luka Doncic is also in play today, but I mean, only purely because he's scoring a ton of fantasy points, but he's still got a lot of risk on this particular slate. Some of the lesser expensive options would be Terry Rozier, who's been very good since Ball has been out. And he's been basically matchup proof. He's had a couple off games, but this is a very good game here against Chicago. I don't think Chicago's putting up much of a fight against anybody lately. However, the risk of a potential lopsided game could come into play either direction, so do keep that in mind. But he's definitely capable of a big game here, and he's significantly cheaper than the other guards I've already mentioned. And then for a very extreme value play, Sam Merrill for Cleveland. He has played pretty well in certain situations. He's very boom or bust because he's scoring dependent, but he's had a couple of good games in a row. And against Washington in the last game, he played 30 minutes and scored 27 fantasy points. He's still under 4K, so he's kind of a Hail Mary play, but he does look like he's going to get some minutes today with the guys that are still out for Cleveland, so he's probably worth a look, though he definitely carries some risk. Looking at our forwards, we're going to start with Carl Towns. Oopsie. For Minnesota. Now he does face a tougher match against Houston, but he's played very well lately. He's a little bit underpriced too. His price has dropped down because of some of his recent games, but I think he's still worth a look here. And even though it's a tougher matchup, he's definitely a decent play. But I really like Jalen Johnson. He is a core play for me. He's pricing up some as a result of how he's played, but this game is going to be a very extreme scoring opportunity for both teams. He's got 50 fantasy point upside. As you can see, he's been over 40 fantasy points in the 3 straight games, and his price is just too cheap. Yeah, it's come up some as he's been low most of the season, but it's hard to ignore the fact that he's played like that and the fact that this game should be super high scoring. So he's a great option on the slate. Looking at DeMar DeRozan, he has had to pick up some slack because of all the injuries to the Bulls. And while he does have a consistency to him, he has not really had any blow up games. And I'm a little concerned that he's not really going to have those type of games. So he's going to be somewhat hard to roster today due to the price point, but he's still a viable option and a relatively safe play from that perspective. He won't kill your lineup most of the time. Looking at Sadiq Bey, his minutes are still high. I didn't know if his minutes would drop back down a little bit when Jalen Johnson returned, but he appears to keep those minutes up. There's a lot of guys here on Atlanta that have some potential. He's definitely one of them. His ceiling is a little bit lower than some of the others options at this position, but he's definitely a relatively safe option, and he's played a lot of minutes, and that gives him some potential here. Dante DiVincenzo for the Knicks has uh, made a case that he's a viable option in fantasy now that Quickly has been shipped off to Toronto, and it looks like his minutes are going to be a little bit higher than they were prior. He played very well in the couple of games so far, and I look for him to continue that here in a okay matchup against Philly. He's not a must play, but he's definitely somebody worth a look here. Looking at Bogdanovich for Atlanta, he's also somebody that has some interesting upside today, though he does carry some risk. He should get 25 to 30 minutes in this one, but with the high scoring potential, he definitely has some upside as we know he can have big games. However, he is likely to be hurt a little bit more with Jalen Johnson being at full strength now, but he still has some utility on the slate. Karis LeVert, also an interesting play today, as he has had some big games with the injuries to the Cavs, and that will continue here. The question is like, he tends to be scoring dependent, so he does need to score a decent amount of points to really pay off here, but his price is cheap enough that he's worth a look on the slate, and he also, guard and forward potential here. Looking at our centers, Embiid is a top overall option. However, he's not going to be easy to roster due to his price point, and there's a lot of guys that are in the price range that are a little bit lower that have just as much upside as him. But of course, he's played as good as anybody in the NBA for the last while, and he did take a few games off, but he looks like he's back in full strength now. Looking at Jarrett Allen for Cleveland, he's an interesting play today because his price has popped up a lot, but he's been just absolutely getting a monster amount of rebounds. He's really taken on somewhat of a Julius Randle role for the Cavs, and for the record, they're playing against one of the weakest teams against centers on the slate. In the last game, he scored 56 fantasy points. From that perspective, he does appear to be a little bit underpriced. Looking at Miles Turner, he definitely carries a high risk, high reward situation here, but this matchup does give him some utility. The only question here is if he's going to get enough minutes to really pay off, and if he doesn't get into foul trouble, which he's had a few times, that does limit him. I do think some guys for the Pacers are going to open up, especially if we look at the Pacers, but I'll look at them in a second. Isaiah Jackson is also a guy for Indiana that I like just by default here, though he probably won't get more than 20 minutes. In the games that he does get some minutes, he has some utility. This type of matchup with high scoring and potential definitely plays into his thing because they're going to need more legs, and he tends to play minutes in these types of games more so than in the weaker games. So, and if the guys that are questionable for the Pacers get rolled out, he would definitely get a little bit of a boost, or at least a potential boost. Kevin Love also has some utility for Miami, though he definitely carries some risk. He is playing over 20 minutes, and he's been scoring a good fantasy output the last few games. He definitely carries some risk, but he's definitely somebody to consider today. I do want to look at Indiana, though, and look at this team. So if Brown and Nimhard both are ruled out, I would look at Jalen Smith as becoming a core play. His minutes will definitely rise if those two guys are out. He definitely carries some risk as his minutes have been in flux, and Isaiah Jackson is definitely on his case, but he's definitely a capable option. Matherion and Nesmith and Heels would all have some utility as well. This team is loaded with players that can score fantasy points in situations like this, and so there's definitely worth some looks here. I will notice for Atlanta as well, the similar situation with Hunter being out. Pretty much, all their players have some utility on the slate. This is a game that you could literally just stack both teams and potentially do pretty well. Obviously, that's going to be one way a lot of people are going to try to go, and so mixing in some other guys that are good from other games is definitely going to be advantageous today. But there's definitely going to be some risk associated doing that. Overall, I think it's a pretty wacky slate, so I'm going to be playing light, but hopefully it's a pretty good one. Hopefully we have some big wins. So thank you guys for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.